Chapter 2. The Paranoid Style. From the start, the Cultural Immunology Research Lab at Tufts University was a modest enterprise. The Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy provided most of the operating costs, but the School of Medicine provided the space, which meant the lab was not on Tufts' leafy Medford campus north of Cambridge, but in Boston proper, among the university's sprawling medical facilities. The lab's budget made it possible for Veruza to take on just one full-time graduate student, drawn from the university's MD, PhD candidates. These graduate research appointments lasted 2 years, after which time, if a student wished to continue working with the lab, she had to find outside funding. When Veruza went missing, there had been 2 application cycles, and of the combined 37 Tufts graduate students who were eligible, 21 applied to work with Veruza, surprising many at the medical school. Tom Ferguson, the first grad student to work in the lab, told me that part of the appeal was the operation's small size. There aren't many arrangements where you'll work that intimately with your advisor. There are cases where that proximity might be more challenge than benefit, but Rala's incredibly generous. You're going to be involved in her research. You're going to build a real relationship. Indeed, Ferguson is listed as a co-author on 2 of Veruza's papers published during and just after his time working in her lab. Ferguson tried to get funding to continue his research in the lab for a 3rd year, but ultimately nothing came through. I was a finalist for everything and the finalist for nothing. That's cultural immunology right now. The lab's second graduate student was Marie Saito. It was Saito who first reported the founder of cultural immunology missing. When her boss, thesis advisor, and mentor didn't show up at the lab one morning in April, Saito didn't think much of it. If Veruza was behind in her correspondence or administrative work, she occasionally worked from home. She usually checked in by email or phone, but Saito simply assumed she'd been caught up in whatever she was working on. When a second day arrived with no word from Veruza, however, Saito became worried. On the 3rd, she called the police. The police found nothing. They searched Veruza's apartment and discovered no signs of forced entry, struggle, or domestic distress. Veruza's last credit card transaction had been the night before she didn't show up for work, when she'd picked up dinner at a Turkish place near her apartment. The clerk there recognized a picture of Veruza, said she was a regular, and that there had been nothing unusual about the minutes she spent collecting her food. The BPD found 8 video sightings of Veruza from the various security and CCTV systems around the city that were networked to the department's facial recognition software. All 8 recordings were made the day before Veruza failed to show up for work, and none showed anything significant or unusual. Veruza in a coffee shop, Veruza getting into a cab outside a liquor store, Veruza in the subway, Veruza passing by a bank just a few blocks from her apartment, evidently on her way home for the night. The police interviewed several people at Tufts and a few neighbors. They talked with a cousin of Veruza's in California. Nothing. No body, they said, and no evidence of a crime. Nothing to do but wait. For all they knew, Rala Veruza was just a flighty academic who had gone on vacation without telling anyone. Saito, who wears her hair cropped short in what seems a practical decision more than a stylish one, is pointedly direct, rarely uncertain or hesitant. She grew up in Seattle, the granddaughter of Japanese immigrants who were interned during World War II. "There's a lot of gray in the world," she told me once. "A lot of moral ambiguity. But some things are just fucked up." Though she has an air of impatience, as if she is several steps ahead and must wait for everyone around her to catch up, her certainty makes her an easy, engaging conversationalist. When we met in Budapest, when she told me about those first weeks after Veruza disappeared, I had to ask very few questions, and when I did, I got out only a few words before Saito was nodding in emphatic agreement, ready to sprint ahead with her answer. At first, she allowed herself to be comforted by the police's suggestion that Veruza might have simply forgotten to tell anyone she was vacationing on a remote island. I wanted to believe that the next day she might show up with a wild story and we could laugh about it and then get back to work. But flaking out is not Rala. I knew that. And so, after more than a week of waiting, trying to believe that the situation might resolve itself, Saito started calling Veruza's colleagues and asking if they'd seen her. She spoke to Horvat's assistant, and then to Horvat. She set up the auto-reply on Veruza's email to announce her disappearance and ask for help finding her. Eventually, she called Boston's news outlets, which, for a few days, savored the story of the vanished researcher. And she continued to work long hours at the lab, doing as much as she could to push Veruza's research forward, to make progress in her absence. She was determined to be ready, if and when her boss returned, to seamlessly resume their work. Whatever had happened, the last thing Veruza would want was for her absence to slow the exciting sense of possibility and discovery that fueled their young field. Saito was dismayed to hear that Horvat was considering canceling the conference. He wouldn't think of it, he said, if they were discussing Veruza's untimely death. Canceling would be so obviously contrary to what Veruza would want. But a disappearance felt even more disorienting. Veruza wasn't just gone. The sense of who she was had also become elusive. Were they still certain they could guess what Veruza would want? Saito was certain, and Horvat was persuaded to let the conference go forward under its own inertia, to leave the schedule of presentations, panels, and work sessions unchanged. He insisted, however, on doing something to acknowledge the unsettling context of the conference. Days before researchers began arriving in Budapest, he sent an email to the attendees. "I will not deliver my planned opening remarks," he wrote, "and we will use our opening reception to honor Rala." To Saito, this sounded like a memorial. She worried that Horvat would, through good intentions, implicitly declare Veruza dead, and thereby declare her research dead, demoralizing all the other researchers whose work rested on Veruza's, sapping the dynamic energy of cultural immunology writ large. Veruza had asked Saito to accompany her to Budapest to assist her, and now Saito decided to keep the appointment. Someone had to be there to represent Veruza's work, her very much alive ideas and research. Someone had to represent the missing woman so that she did not prematurely become a fossil, a memory calcified with grief, no longer dynamic enough to drive an intellectual revolution. I ended up going too. I was embarrassed by how staggered I was by Veruza's disappearance, given that I'd never met her. Yes, I had been pursuing an interview with Veruza for months, and that opportunity had vanished when she died, but my grief swelled out of proportion to that loss. I had, despite Horvat's warnings, obviously been getting ahead of myself, developing expectations about my interview. Fantasies. Veruza saying something that would resolve my anxieties about my craft and my livelihood. Showing me, in a word, how to harness the bizarre power of the Islesboro piece and use it to heal our disordered belief. I shouldn't have ever slipped into such fantastical thinking. It was the kind of lazy, self-soothing belief that I'd set out to expose. And if I canceled my trip to the conference, I'd be indulging that kind of thinking even further. Veruza was not magical. There was plenty to learn from and about cultural immunology, even if she wasn't there. I might even still get someone, Saito was my first choice, to talk about last year's hyper-unresolved research session. And since I was trying to reground myself in the practical world, I had to admit that Veruza's disappearance was its own story, a far more saleable story than the one about the unpublished work presented in a windowless conference room a year earlier. It had been by this point 9 months since I'd sold anything, and I had started making only the minimum payment on my credit cards, that debt ballooning month to month. My airfare and hotel reservation were non-refundable, but if I could sell the story, I might be able to expense them. It would be irresponsible not to go to Hungary and at least consider the disappearance angle. On the Sunday before the conference, I boarded a red-eye to Frankfurt, with a morning connection to Budapest. I didn't sleep at all, spending both flights reading cultural immunology papers, Veruza's and some of her colleagues. I laid on the bed when I got to my hotel a few hours before the conference's opening reception, but my chest was too tight, my jaw too clenched to sleep. I took a shower and headed to the conference early, hoping to catch Saito before the opening reception began. For the last 6 years, Horvat's conference has been held in the National Hall of Conventions, a former Austro-Hungarian palace attached to a contemporary tower of hotel rooms and converted to a convention center as part of a larger movement to fold Hungary's pre-Soviet history into its current nationalism, to invoke an era when the country was a world power, not a minor satellite. The interior has been refurbished in a rich and elegant Habsburg style, streamlined by modern influence, a surprising break from the typical conference center palette of institutional carpet, fluorescent lighting, and upholstered partitions. The smaller meeting rooms are erstwhile dining rooms, sitting rooms, receiving halls, rooms that time erased. The National Hall has a restaurant, but a long and narrow one that the renovators carved from a corridor that connected the main rooms to the kitchens and servants' quarters at the rear of the palace. The main reception hall, home to keynotes and the large receptions that mark the beginning and end of a conference, was once a ballroom. Is still a ballroom, a beautiful birch floor waiting just under the familiar collapsible round tables. As researchers gathered on that birch floor and at those round tables to inaugurate the 11th Conference on Superorganism Health, they moved as if they were inside an anxiety dream, lost in a setting they thought they knew well, certain only that something was ineffably, invisibly, and inexorably wrong. I did not find Saito, but as I moved among the attendees, introducing myself and asking them about their history at the conference, they just shook their heads and marveled over and over at Veruza's absence. The only thing I was going to find in Budapest now was grief and disappointment, theirs and mine. Horvat stepped onto the dais at the front of the room precisely at 4 o'clock, but he spoke only briefly. "I do not want to memorialize Rala," he said. "I hope that she is back with us here next year. It is more fitting for now, I think, that instead of giving speeches, we speak intimately, among ourselves, of our friend." Under the circumstances, I found his forced optimism depressing. Perhaps because I was a writer, coming up in the shadow of Virginia Woolf and Ernest Hemingway and David Foster Wallace, I couldn't shake the idea that the most accomplished people in a field are particularly vulnerable to suicide. That was certainly the most common, simplest explanation when people vanished from their lives. Today, of course, no one views Veruza's disappearance as either common or simple, but I had not yet learned any of the things that make her case so confounding and contentious. Regardless of Horvat's intentions, the reception did quickly come to resemble, if not a memorial, then a wake. The world's cultural immunologists getting drunk in a Hungarian ballroom, trading stories about their departed leader. By the time I spotted Saito, she was surrounded by colleagues, the group hovering around her table, changing and circulating, but never thinning. Whenever I caught a glimpse of her through the throng, she looked strained and increasingly frustrated. Interest in her seemed strongly correlated with a conviction that Veruza was gone forever. Saito began to feel like a living altar. People wanted to be near her because of her intimate relationship with Veruza, because she was the last among them to have seen her, and, most intriguingly, because she had been deeply involved in Veruza's research, work that many were now discussing as if it were lost forever. But Saito heard something else in the conversations around her that she found even more disappointing, and then alarming. She eventually excused herself from the table where she'd been trapped for over 2 hours and made her way onto the empty dais. As she linked her phone to the podium, the blank screen behind her lighting up, conversations around the ballroom began to fall silent. People murmured about a possible tribute video or montage. When I mentioned this to Saito later that night, she shrugged. Of a sort. Whatever the room expected, they were willing to wait patiently for a long moment while Saito gathered herself. "I should have expected this," she finally said into the microphone, frowning at the assembled researchers. "I came here hoping to keep Rala's research alive. Instead, it's coming to life all around me." She shook her head. "For the past 2 hours, all I've heard is speculation about what might have happened or might soon happen to Rala. You've asked me about suicide, foul play, flight from the law, flight from criminals, mental breakdown, fugue state. Circular speculation that cannot be resolved, but you keep at it as if enough speculation might somehow dislodge the truth. It's eerie. I was here last year with Rala. I know you know something about the work we've been doing. You keep asking me about Rala's research? It's this." She gestured out at the crowd. This room tonight is a case study in the hyper-unresolved style that Rala has been studying for the past 3 years." Saito had clicked through several slides before I realized she was showing the presentation she and Veruza had delivered a year earlier, interlaced with excerpts from 2 papers Veruza had under consideration at prestigious journals. And I was right. The hyper-unresolved style was a disorder of the story, an increasingly common neurological affliction plaguing the world's cultural organisms, though Veruza was focused particularly on the ways it afflicted the cultural organism that is the United States of America. I took out my phone and started recording, working my way to the front of the ballroom. This was everything I'd wanted to learn, delivered more completely and explicitly than I could have hoped. But Saito was visibly upset, grieving and frustrated, yes, but also scared. As she ticked through her lab's research, she wasn't just admonishing her colleagues, but pleading with them to stop what they were doing, terrified of what might happen if they didn't. Even as I got exactly the answers I'd been chasing for months, my sense of uneasiness deepened. In one of the papers, Veruza writes, "Hyper-unresolved storytelling is a search for and belief in complete resolution, paired with a constant deferral of resolution. The hyper-unresolved story fetishizes complexity while rejecting ambiguity. It is Gnostic, unresolved, and interpretive." The easiest way to make sense of this definition, Saito told the crowd in the ballroom, is with an example. And the readiest example, the kind of story in which these traits, Gnostic, unresolved, interpretive, are most baldly on display, is the conspiracy theory. I braced myself against a high-top table. If, back in Maine, scrolling through the internet, I had felt perched on the edge of a new perspective, I was now in freefall, the ground rushing up at me. Disoriented and thrilled, the thing that scared me most was how easily I might have missed this moment, not spoken with Horvat, not come to Budapest, not been in the room when Saito grew so frustrated she decided to give an impromptu presentation on the unpublished research that answered my most haunting questions. Dizzy with gratitude, I steadied myself enough to tap at my phone, annotating my recording and trying to catalog all the questions crowding my thoughts. Because conspiracy theories serve as a ready example of the hyper-unresolved style, later in the conference and in subsequent coverage and discussion of Veruza's disappearance, almost everyone referred to Veruza's disorder of the story as paranoid storytelling. But Saito is emphatic on this point. The disorder is not conspiracy theories. That's like finding someone who's been beaten up and saying that the bruises are making them weak. Bruising is the response of a healthy body. It is not the problem. Conspiracy theories are, by all measures, typical and benign features of nearly every cultural organism. If hyper-unresolved storytelling were confined to conspiracy theories, it would not be a disorder. The real negative effects show up in the data when you start to see these traits in all kinds of stories, not just conspiracy theories. Still, even Saito admits that she herself sometimes uses the paranoid storytelling shorthand, and the conspiracy theory remains a useful example to understand what a Gnostic, unresolved, and interpretive story looks like. A Gnostic belief, as Veruza defined it, is the belief that everything is knowable and knowing will save you. The existential appeal of the conspiracy theory, and all hyper-unresolved stories, is that it can explain the chaos of the universe. It is religious in its promise to make sense of the world's suffering and iniquities. The conspiracy theory seems to reveal a grand design to unmask the shadowy person or group who controls the world or some part of it. Such a story has no use for ambiguity, ambivalence, or contradiction. Forget that we live in a chaotic universe. If we can connect the dots, we can uncover the hidden plot. We can reveal all. And yet, conspiracy theories are unresolved. They don't end. They can't end. They unfold forever, their sinister antagonists always a step ahead. They have no happy endings, no sad endings, no ambiguous endings. Every new detail, every revelation, every twist is absorbed into the story without moving it any closer to a conclusion. Resolution, and therefore meaning, is forever deferred. Without resolution, conspiracy theories are forever open to new interpretation. A rose is never a rose. Every detail is a clue to be parsed, the story incomplete until you've analyzed it. What someone does is less important than why they do it, and no one is being honest when they tell you why they do what they do. Drawing connections and uncovering coincidences gives us the illusion that we're being analytical, Saito told her colleagues. But the truth is, when you're looking at the night sky and there are thousands and thousands of stars, you can draw any constellation you want. This trio of traits makes the hyper-unresolved story a fundamentally circular one. Justice awaits. It just happens to await at the end of a story that can never end. That description obviously fit Lyle and Emma's Islesboro conspiracy with eerie precision. But conspiracy theories, even when it seems like there are a lot of them, are just one kind of story. According to Veruza, the hyper-unresolved style becomes a disorder when it gets applied to other kinds of stories, when it becomes so dominant that it crowds out other ways of thinking. And Veruza's research showed that paranoid storytelling is now the primary way that the cultural organism that is the United States believes. Even stories that aren't explicitly paranoid are being told in the paranoid style, sometimes intentionally. The analyst and the pundit, those 21st century shamans, are paranoid storytellers. Interpret these facts for our audience, make sense of the world for us so that we might control it. And we have elevated them again and again in recent decades. This is most obvious online, on cable TV, but it is true too in print. At the beginning of the century, when the internet was rolling into the news business, newspaper after newspaper announced that providing the facts was no longer a viable business model, because people could get facts instantly and everywhere. To be competitive, a news operation needed to provide analysis of the facts, to help their readers and viewers make sense of the wash of information in which we now live. That idea, that all information can be parsed for hidden meaning, is a paranoid idea, even when it's not used for paranoid ends. There was a time when most of what we call the news was about the past, Saito told her colleagues in Budapest. Reporting things that had already happened. Today, what we consider the news is heavily skewed toward the future. Speculation about what might or could happen, deferring resolution, fetishizing complexity, rejecting ambiguity. The danger posed by paranoid storytelling is not its existence. Veruza writes, "It is easy to see how thoughtful people would make the decision to bring more analysis into news coverage. There is much that's interesting and potentially healthful about hyper-unresolved stories. The need for interpretation blurs and perhaps dissolves the line between author and audience. The hyper-unresolved style has helped usher the voice of God out of the news business, replaced by a new collective authorship. The malleability of these stories, their lack of boundaries and infinite content makes them fundamentally modular. They are meant to be assembled anew by each person who encounters them. There is something fundamentally democratic and populist about the hyper-unresolved story." But Veruza's data suggests there's a very real limit to the value of those things. Any style of storytelling that becomes ubiquitous ends up shaping stories for which it is not a good fit. But the paranoid style is especially aggressive. The belief that there is always more to be deciphered, that existential answers are just out of reach, undermines any story that isn't interpretive and Gnostic. Other modes of cultural storytelling become naive or sinister. One of the papers Saito shared from the dais considers the recent evolution of an enduring American story, the criminal trial. Contemporary true crime stories increasingly start from the premise that the handling of some criminal case was flawed or incomplete. The host, narrator, producer launches their own independent investigation of the case, which does not rely on the uncovering of new facts, but on a review of the existing evidence. The cases chosen for this treatment are complex or muddy, but the goal of the story remains to discover and refine a simple and clear ultimate truth. The American justice system, though, is designed around a very different kind of storytelling. Criminal trials are not meant to tell a story about the defendant, whether or not they are guilty. Typically, a case goes to trial precisely because the answer to that question is unknowable. Instead, criminal trials are designed to tell a story about the state. Does it have the evidence to prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? That is a question that can be resolved. And the state's story in a criminal trial is pointedly constrained, rooted in a specific set of admissible facts, averse to speculation and interpretation. The paranoid style sneers at that stuffy, rigid storytelling and replaces it with something interpretive and Gnostic. Rules of evidence are for sheep. Consider the facts from any angle that's interesting. Forget the state's burden of proof. Determine with righteous certainty innocence or guilt. Deliver cosmic justice for the defendant and the victim, and reveal all that is bankrupt about our justice system. When that basic pattern repeats over and over, a culture becomes suspicious of its own foundational stories. The world's institutions, its collective enterprises, are all cast as malign actors. The courts are too broken and corrupt to act on the truth even when it's obvious to anyone watching from home. Media outlets are ideological propaganda machines. Universities are indoctrination factories. Churches are preying on the weak. The governing bodies of sports leagues are putting in the fix. And awards committees are on the take. Philanthropic groups are just fronts for a vast child sex trafficking network. Elections are rigged. Meanwhile, hyper-unresolved stories elevate the individual, the lonely truth seeker who can step outside the group and decipher its true nature. When we are compulsively searching for resolution, the actions of other people become clues to be interpreted, not reflections of a cultural organism to which we ourselves belong. If one person believes something, they are brave truth seekers. If 1,000,000 people believe something, they are gullible fools. Our species thrives when we find the balance between our lives as individuals and our lives as groups, Veruza writes. The hyper-unresolved style is upsetting that balance. I expected Saito's unsettling performance to bring the conference's opening reception to a close, for the researchers to shuffle away to digest and protest her accusations over dinner. To their credit, they stayed, and, on the whole, did not become defensive or hostile. Horvat got out a second microphone and roamed through the crowd, facilitating the many questions for Saito. Yes, he told me when I remarked at the gracious reception of Saito's indictment. We are all willing to be called paranoid, if it means we can see Rala's data. As the researchers asked questions, and as Saito explained why their speculation about Veruza struck her as disordered, her indignation waned. 30 minutes after she'd gotten on stage, she was saying, Yes, that's the right question. Let me show you this analysis. Later, when she'd finally come down from the dais and I'd introduced myself, as we waited in line at the bar, she said, I wouldn't have gotten up there if I wasn't really angry. But once I was, it's like, no, I'm at work right now. I'm giving a presentation on Rala's research to the entire field. It's not how I planned to do it, but that is more or less what I came here to do. Once we had our drinks and she agreed to let me record our conversation, we stood at one of the high tops and I told her about my Islesboro piece, the way I had tried, before I even knew about Veruza's research, to use this nutty conspiracy theory to illuminate a broader problem with our belief. And how spectacularly it had backfired, how quickly my piece had been absorbed into the conspiracy theory, just another piece of the mosaic, along with thousands of online posts and memes and videos. Like the colleagues Saito had just lit into, I had spurred all this paranoid storytelling without meaning to. Had Veruza suggested that writing was especially conducive to telling paranoid stories? Conspiracists were always just asking questions, but that also described my job. Was I stirring the same pot? Was writing too declarative? Did it promise a resolution it could never deliver? Or, because it is no longer the default medium through which we communicate, has it become inherently fringy, an outsider's medium? Look, Saito said. One of the dangers of ubiquity, when the paranoid style is everywhere, is that we all become paranoid audiences. We expect it. We look for it. We turn anything into a paranoid story. She gestured with her drink at the ballroom. We all do it. That's the point. She tilted her glass at me. You might be doing it right now. You're interpreting the response of a few readers to one story, combining it with some viewership numbers, and drawing a sweeping conclusion about your entire profession that is almost certainly not anything you or anyone else could ever prove or disprove. For all you know, Just as many people read your story in exactly the way you hoped. I toasted to that, simultaneously chastened and relieved. It was possible, then, to write something about the hyper-unresolved style that would help. If more people were at least aware of what was happening to us, that could be good. That's why you're here, isn't it? Write about the hyper-unresolved style, not in the hyper-unresolved style? You've been warned. Gnostic, unresolved, interpretive. I had become distracted from this incredible revelation. I now had criteria with which to assess any story, to gauge its level of disorder. It might take many drafts to get it right, but that was nothing to be afraid of. That was just writing. Revising was one of writing's great strengths, one of the things that made it special, that allowed you to interrogate your own thinking. It had been months since I'd felt my old love for writing, my faith in it, and I almost hugged Saito. But as I gushed, Saito's expression fell. I asked her what was wrong. I'm sure you'll strike the right balance. Laszlo wouldn't have told everyone about you, Rala wouldn't have agreed to an interview, but now you'll have to write about her disappearance. I saw in her eyes the smoldering fear I'd sensed the moment she got up on the dais, more visible now that her anger was spent. She was, of course, afraid that Veruza would remain inexplicably lost, but her fear ran deeper than that. Someone close to Veruza had asked her a question a week earlier, one she'd been trying to forget ever since, to dismiss as uninformed and silly. But a room full of intelligent researchers who ought to know better sliding into unresolvable speculation, that had given the question new voice, so that it echoed through Saito's mind, impossible to ignore. Of all the accidents, calamities, or illnesses that could befall someone, an unexplained disappearance, a vanishing, is by far the most hyper-unresolved. It all but demands paranoid storytelling. Yes, life is full of chaos and random noise, but a researcher investigating the dangers of paranoid storytelling, disappearing into a void of paranoid storytelling, could that really be a coincidence?